I had been holding my breath for 20 years, waiting for a son who had already exhaled and moved on. 20 years of mailing birthday checks that were cashed without a single thank you note. 20 years of sending handmade gifts that I would later see sold for pennies at their garage sales. 20 years of apologizing to an answering machine for simply existing. And I left messages. God knows, I left so many messages. Jeremy, it's Mom. I just wanted to hear your voice. Jean, I sent that quilt I promised. I hope it keeps you warm. Merry Christmas, you too. I love you more than anything. But never, not once in 2 decades, did the silence break. No return call. No, love you, Mom. No photos of my grandchildren. Just a void where my family used to be. Silence had become my only companion. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button. Now, let me tell you how it happened. The air conditioning inside the First National Bank was freezing, but I was sweating. I stood there, clutching my purse against my chest like a shield. Inside that purse was a cashier's check made out to my son, Jeremy. $10,000. That is a lot of money for a 70-year-old widow living on a fixed income in Scottsdale. It was money I had set aside for a new roof or maybe a safer car. But this morning, I woke up with that feeling. You know the one. That gnawing pit in your stomach that tells you something is wrong with your child. Call it mother's intuition. Call it anxiety. I just knew Jeremy was in trouble. I hadn't heard from him in 8 months. Not a call, not a text, not even a generic birthday card. But in my head, I made excuses for him. I told myself he was too proud to ask for help. I told myself the silence meant he was struggling, drowning in debt, too ashamed to pick up the phone and tell his mother he had failed. So, like a fool, I decided to be the hero. I decided to send the check before he even had to ask. I wanted to buy my way back into his life. If I saved him, maybe he would finally look at me again. Maybe he would remember who dried his tears when he was 6 years old. The line moved forward. Next guest, please, the teller called out. I took a step forward, reaching into my bag to pull out the check. But just then, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I almost ignored it. I didn't want to lose my place in line. But habit took over. I pulled it out, squinting at the bright screen. It wasn't a text from Jeremy. It was a notification from Facebook. Martha, a woman from my old neighborhood back east, had tagged me in a post. I tapped the screen. The image loaded slowly on the bank's spotty Wi-Fi. When the photo finally popped up, the air left my lungs. It was Jeremy and his wife, Jean. They weren't in trouble. They weren't suffering. They weren't sitting at a kitchen table stressing over bills. They were on a yacht. The water behind them was that impossible turquoise blue you only see in travel magazines. Jean was wearing a wide-brimmed hat and oversized sunglasses, holding a glass of champagne. Jeremy was shirtless, tan, throwing a peace sign at the camera, grinning from ear to ear. I read the caption Martha had reposted. It was from Jean's account, living our best life in the Caribbean. 10 days of paradise. Hashtag no worries, hashtag blessed, hashtag yacht life. The post was uploaded 20 minutes ago. I stood there in the bank lobby, staring at that check in my hand. $10,000. I was about to send $10,000 to a man drinking champagne on a yacht while I was eating generic brand soup to save money. Ma'am, can I help you? The teller asked. Her voice sounded far away. I looked up at her young, polite face. Then I looked down at the check. I stepped out of the line. No, I whispered. No, you can't. I walked out of the bank into the blinding Arizona heat. My heart was hammering against my ribs, not from fear, but from a sudden, sharp clarity. I found a concrete bench outside the pharmacy next door and sat down. My hands were shaking. I took the check out of the envelope. I looked at Jeremy's name printed on the payee line. Let me ask you something right now. If you were sitting on that bench, seeing your son living like a king while you scraped by to save him, would you have mailed that check anyway? Would you have sent it just to be nice? Just to keep the door open? I didn't. I took that check between my fingers and I tore it. The sound of the paper ripping was the loudest thing I had heard all day. I tore it in half, then into quarters, then into tiny, jagged confetti. I walked over to the trash can and let the pieces fall. I sat back down and stared at the parking lot. That was the moment the illusion finally broke. For 20 years, I had been lying to myself. It started slowly, right after he married Jean. At first, it was just missed Sunday calls. Then, they stopped coming for Thanksgiving. Then, Christmas became a text message. Then, the text messages stopped. I was the emergency contact on all their forms. I knew this because Jeremy had mentioned it once years ago. But I realized something terrifying on that bench. I wasn't an emergency contact. I was an insurance policy. You don't call your insurance policy to say hello. You don't invite your insurance policy to dinner. You don't ask your insurance policy how its day was. You ignore it. You pay the bare minimum of attention to keep it active, and you wait. You wait until disaster strikes, and then you cash it in. That's all I was to them. A safety net they hoped they'd never have to speak to, but kept around just in case the yacht sank. I thought about all the times I had blamed myself. Was I too pushy? Did I say something wrong at the wedding? Was I not sophisticated enough for Jean? She came from money, or at least she acted like she did. She looked at my furniture like it was diseased. She looked at my clothes like they were costumes. I had spent 2 decades trying to twist myself into a shape they would accept. I sent birthday cards with cash, which were never acknowledged. I sent anniversary gifts that I never saw them use. I commented on their photos, beautiful and love you both, only to have my comments ignored while they replied to their friends. I was a ghost in their lives, a ghost with a checkbook. But looking at that photo of them on the boat, something inside me snapped. It wasn't just anger. It was embarrassment. I felt foolish. I was the old woman worrying about her little boy while he was a 45-year-old man burning through money I could only dream of having. He didn't need me. He didn't want me. And worse, he didn't respect me. If I had sent that money, they would have taken it. That's the worst part. I know they would have. They would have cashed it, added it to their vacation fund, and maybe, if I was lucky, sent a text that said THX. I took a deep breath. The hot air filled my lungs. For the first time in 20 years, I didn't feel desperate. I felt cold. I pulled my phone back out. I opened the photo again. I didn't cry. I just looked at Jeremy's smile. It was the same smile he had when he was 6, asking for ice cream. But the eyes were different now. They were selfish eyes. I went to my settings. I found Jean's profile. Block. I found Jeremy's profile. Block. I stood up. My purse felt lighter, without the check inside. I wasn't going to call them and scream. I wasn't going to write a long letter telling them how much they hurt me. That's what the old Brenda would have done, begged for an explanation. This Brenda was done begging. I walked back to my car. The one-way street of my love had finally reached a dead end. But as I drove home, I didn't know that the silence wasn't going to last. I didn't know that by tearing up that check, I had inadvertently started a war. Because people like Jeremy and Jean, they don't notice you when you're giving. They only notice you when you stop. And I had just stopped. Driving home from the bank that day, the silence in my car felt heavy. Usually I listen to the radio, oldies mostly, but that day I turned it off. I needed to hear myself think. I needed to understand how I had let it get this bad. You see, people always ask, what happened? Did you have a fight? Did you say something unforgivable? That's the thing about estrangement. It's rarely an explosion. It's almost never a screaming match where dishes get thrown and doors get slammed. If it were a fight, at least there would be passion. At least there would be contact. No, losing Jeremy wasn't an explosion. It was a slow leak. It started right after the wedding. I remember the first time I felt the shift. It was Thanksgiving, the first year they were married. I had cooked for 2 days, made Jeremy's favorite pecan pie, the stuffing he liked with the sausage, the whole works. I had set the table with the good china. At 10 a.m., the phone rang. It was Jeremy. "Hey, Mom," he said, sounding rushed. "Look, we're not going to make it. Jean's not feeling well. We're just going to order in." I was disappointed. Sure. I told him I'd wrap up leftovers and bring them by the next day. "No," he said. "Too quickly." "No, don't bother. We just need space. We'll call you." They didn't call. And that became the pattern. Christmas turned into, "We're going to Jean's parents this year." Easter became, "We're just too busy with work." Birthdays became a text message sent 3 days late. "HBD Mom. Crazy week. Hope you're good." I became the queen of excuses. I defended them to everyone. When my friends at the senior center asked about my son, I'd lie. "Oh, Jeremy is doing so well. He's just swamped with his big promotion. He travels a lot." I was protecting his reputation while he was neglecting my heart. But there was one moment, one specific memory, that I buried deep down because it hurt too much to look at. Until today. It was about 5 years ago. I had taken up quilting. It helped with the arthritis in my hands, kept them moving. I decided to make a quilt for their guest bed. I thought if I make their home beautiful, maybe they'll invite me over. I spent 6 months on that quilt. It was a double wedding ring pattern, very difficult. I chose fabrics in blues and creams because I knew Jean liked those coastal colors. I stitched love into every square inch of that fabric. I pricked my fingers. I spent hours under the lamp in the evenings, imagining them using it, imagining Jeremy saying, "Wow, Mom made this." I boxed it up, paid $50 for shipping to Connecticut, and sent it off with a handwritten note. I tracked the package. Delivered. I waited. 1 week. 2 weeks. I finally called. It went to voicemail. "Hi, honey, just checking you got the package. Love you." Nothing. 3 months later, I was scrolling through Facebook. I wasn't blocked back then. Jean had posted an album titled Spring Cleaning, Neighborhood Garage Sale. I clicked through the photos. There were old lamps, some books, a broken toaster. And then, in photo number 4, I saw it. In the background, draped over a folding table next to a pile of old gym clothes, was my quilt. There was a piece of masking tape stuck to it. I zoomed in. $10. My heart stopped. 6 months of work. My arthritis flaring up. The $50 in shipping. The note I had written telling them how much I loved them. $10. They hadn't even kept it in a closet. They hadn't even given it to a charity. They threw it on a table in the driveway like it was trash. I remember staring at that computer screen until my eyes burned. I didn't call them. I was too ashamed. I was ashamed that my love was worth $10 to them. I convinced myself it was a mistake. Maybe Jean didn't know I made it. I told myself. Maybe they have too many blankets. God, I was pathetic. Pulling into my driveway now. 20 years later, I looked at my small house. It's not a mansion, but it's mine. The lawn is mowed. The windows are clean. I have my routine. I have my garden. I have my dignity. I realized something as I turned the key in the ignition to shut off the engine. I am not a difficult woman. I don't demand much. I don't ask for money. In fact, I was the one trying to give it. I don't offer unsolicited advice. I don't show up unannounced. I am a good mother. I did my job. I raised a man who is capable, educated, and successful. The problem isn't me. For years, I treated their silence like a punishment I deserved. I scrutinized my own behavior, looking for the crime I must have committed to warrant this treatment. But looking at that empty driveway, the truth finally settled on me. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was light. They don't ignore me because I'm annoying. They don't ignore me because they are so busy. They ignore me because they don't care. It sounds harsh, doesn't it? To say your own child doesn't care about you. But there is freedom in the truth. If they cared, they would call. It takes 30 seconds to send a text. If they cared, they would say thank you for a gift. If they cared, they wouldn't sell a mother's labor for $10 at a yard sale. I got out of the car and walked to my front door. The Arizona sun was setting, painting the sky in purples and oranges. It was beautiful. For the first time in forever, I didn't check my phone as I walked inside. I didn't look for the blinking light on the answering machine. I went into the kitchen, made myself a cup of tea, and sat in my favorite armchair. The house was quiet, but it wasn't lonely. Not tonight. Tonight, it felt peaceful. I was done making excuses. I was done apologizing for existing. I was done paying for a seat at a table where I wasn't welcome. I took a sip of tea. Okay, Jeremy, I said out loud to the empty room. You win. You want silence. You've got it. I didn't know then that the universe has a funny sense of humor. I thought the story was over. I thought I would just fade away into my quiet life, tend to my roses, and let them be. But the universe wasn't done with me yet, because 3 days later, the mailman dropped an envelope in my box. A thick, cream-colored envelope with calligraphy on the front, and that envelope changed everything. I stared at the envelope sitting on my kitchen counter. It looked out of place next to my utility bill and a flyer for a grocery store sale. It was thick, heavy, cream-colored cardstock, the kind of paper that costs more than my weekly food budget. My name and address were written in calligraphy, real ink, not a printer. Mrs. Brenda Gowans. It had been years since I saw my name written with such importance. My hands trembled slightly as I picked it up. It had weight to it. I used my letter opener to slit the top. Inside was another envelope lined with gold foil. And inside that, a stiff card. Jeremy and Jean Gowans request the honor of your presence at the renewal of their vows, celebrating 20 years of love and devotion. Below the script, it listed the location, the Vanderbilt Estate, Greenwich, Connecticut. I put the card down and laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was a dry, hollow sound that echoed in my empty kitchen. 20 years of love and devotion. That was rich. For 20 years, I had received silence. I had received distance. I had received the clear message that I was not welcome in their world. And now, out of the blue, I was being summoned to a mansion in Connecticut to celebrate their perfect marriage. I sat down at the table, running my finger over the raised lettering. A younger version of me, the Brenda from 5 years ago, would have been weeping with joy. She would have been already packing her suitcase, thinking, finally, they want me back. They realized they missed me. But the Brenda who tore up that check at the bank 3 days ago, she was suspicious. I looked at the date on the invitation. The party was in 3 weeks. Why now? Why, after ignoring my calls when I had pneumonia, after forgetting my 70th birthday, after selling my handmade quilt for $10, why send this now? If you want to reconnect with your mother, you pick up the phone. You don't send a formal summons to a black tie event 3,000 miles away. This didn't feel like an olive branch. It felt like a trap. I needed to know what was really going on. I couldn't ask Jeremy. He would just lie. And I certainly couldn't ask Jean. I needed someone on the inside. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found a number I hadn't dialed in over a year. Martha. Martha was the neighborhood busybody back in the town where Jeremy grew up. She was the woman who knew everyone's business before they knew it themselves. We used to play bridge together before I moved to Arizona. The phone rang 4 times. Hello. Martha, it's Brenda. Brenda Gowans. There was a pause, then a gasp. Brenda. Oh my heavens, it has been ages. How are you, dear? How is the desert treating you? I'm fine, Martha. Keeping busy, I said, skipping the pleasantries. Listen, I'm calling because I got something in the mail today. An invitation to Jeremy and Jean's vow renewal in Greenwich. Oh, Martha said. Her tone changed instantly. It dropped an octave. So they invited you? I wasn't sure if they would. That stopped me cold. What does that mean, Martha? Well, she hesitated. I could hear her moving around, probably closing a door, so her husband wouldn't hear. Brenda, honey, you know I don't like to gossip. Martha, you live for gossip, I said firmly. Tell me the truth. Why are they throwing this party? I haven't spoken to them in months. Why do they want me there? Martha sighed. It's not just a party, Brenda. It's a show. A show. Jeremy is in trouble, she whispered. Big trouble. You know that investment firm he started? The one dealing with the cryptocurrency, or whatever it is. Well, word around the club is that it's tanking. Badly. My grip on the phone tightened. Go on. They bought that house in Greenwich 6 months ago, Martha continued. It's massive, Brenda. Way too big for 2 people. But apparently, they are mortgaged to the hilt. They are house poor. They have the fancy cars and the address, but they can barely keep the lights on. My nephew works at the bank downtown, and let's just say, Jeremy has been trying to refinance everything. I closed my eyes. The picture was becoming clear. So what is the party for? I asked. It's a fundraising event, dear. Martha said bluntly. They are framing it as a vow renewal, but look at the guest list if you can. It's not friends and family. It's investors. It's wealthy clients. They are trying to prove they are still successful. They need to look stable, happy, and flush with cash so people will trust them with more money. And me? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Where do I fit in? Martha went quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was gentle, pitying. Brenda, they know you sold your big house in Ohio years ago. They know you live simply. They probably think you're sitting on a nest egg. They think I have money, I said flatly. They think you have a paid-off house and a widow's savings, Martha corrected. And they know you've been desperate to see them. They think if they invite you, give you a glass of champagne and a hug, you'll be so happy to be included that you'll write a check to help the family business. I felt the blood drain from my face. It wasn't love. It wasn't regret. It wasn't a desire to fix our broken family. I was a mark. I was a target. They looked at their mother and saw a piggy bank to smash open. Are you still there, Brenda? Martha asked worriedly. I'm here, I said. My voice was steady now. Thank you, Martha. You have no idea how much you've helped me. You aren't going to go, are you? She asked. Don't let them use you. Honey, stay in Arizona. I have to go, Martha. Take care. I hung up the phone and looked back at the invitation. Jeremy and Jean Gowans request the honor of your presence. They didn't want my honor. They wanted my signature. They thought I was a lonely, pathetic old woman. They thought I was sitting by the phone, pining for them, ready to trade my financial security for a few crumbs of attention. They assumed I was the same Brenda they left behind. The doormat. They had no idea who I was now. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at my cactus garden. I had worked hard for my peace. I lived frugally. I clipped coupons. I drove a 10-year-old car. My house in Scottsdale was small, yes, but it was mine. It was fully paid for. It was my sanctuary. And they wanted to take it. They wanted to liquidate my life to pay for their yacht photos and their Greenwich mansion. A cold fury settled in my chest. It was different from the anger I felt at the bank. This was sharper. It was strategic. If I didn't go, they would just keep calling. They would come up with another lie, another emergency. They would eventually show up on my doorstep with a sob story about how they were going to lose everything. No, I couldn't just ignore this. I had to end it. I looked at the RSVP card. __ accepts with pleasure. __ declines with regret. They expected me to come running. They expected me to be the investor who saved the day, the mommy who bailed them out one last time. Well, I decided right then and there. I would go. I would go to Greenwich. I would drink their champagne. I would eat their expensive appetizers. I would let them parade me around their rich friends. But I wasn't going as a victim. They wanted a wealthy widow. Fine. I'd give them one. I would play the part, so well they wouldn't see the knife until it was already twisted. I picked up a pen. I didn't just check the box. I pressed down, so hard the ink bled through to the other side. Accepts with pleasure. You want me there, Jeremy? I said to the empty room. Be careful what you wish for. I wasn't just going to the party. I was going to teach them a lesson they would never forget. But first, I had some business to take care of. If they wanted my assets, I needed to make sure they were unreachable. I grabbed my car keys. I wasn't going to the store. I was going to see a lawyer. The invitation sat on the table, gleaming in the afternoon sun. It looked like a ticket to a celebration, but to me, it looked like a declaration of war. And I was ready for battle. I didn't sleep the night after I RSVP'd to the party, but I didn't toss and turn with worry either. I lay there staring at the ceiling fan, my mind working like a chessboard. For 20 years, I had played the role of the victim. I sat back and let them hurt me. I let them dictate the terms. We're busy, Mom. We'll call you later, Mom. I waited for their permission to be part of their lives. Not anymore. If I was going to Greenwich, I wasn't going as a mother hoping for a hug. I was going as a woman entering a business negotiation. And the first rule of negotiation is leverage. They wanted my money. That was the leverage. As long as I had access to my savings and my home equity, I was vulnerable. I knew myself. I knew that if Jeremy looked me in the eye with tears streaming down his face, begging for help because he was going to lose his house, I might cave. A mother's heart is a traitorous thing. It forgets the pain the moment the child cries. So, I had to take the option off the table. I had to make it impossible for me to save them, even if I wanted to. The next morning, at 9 a.m. sharp, I walked into the office of Mr. Henderson, my estate attorney. He's a good man about my age, with pictures of his grandkids all over his desk. He's handled my will for years. Brenda, he said, standing up to shake my hand. Everything all right? You sounded urgent on the phone. I need to make some changes, Robert, I said, sitting down and smoothing my skirt. And I need them done fast, before I travel to Connecticut in 3 weeks. He grabbed a notepad. Okay, what are we updating? The beneficiaries. No, I said, I want to create a trust, an irrevocable trust. Robert paused, looking at me over his reading glasses. Irrevocable. Brenda, you know that's a serious step. Once you put your assets in there, you can't just take them back. You give up control. It's usually for people trying to avoid estate taxes or protect assets from Well, from creditors. Or from family, I said quietly. He put his pen down. He knew about Jeremy. He knew about the silence. I want to move everything. I continued, my voice steady. My savings, my investments, the CD that matures next month. All of it. I want it locked up tight. I want to live off the interest that will be enough for my daily needs. But I want the principal to be untouchable, not by me, not by a judge, and certainly not by my son. And the beneficiary, he asked softly, if something happens to you? The Whispering Pines Animal Sanctuary, I said, they take in old dogs that nobody wants. They deserve it more. Robert looked at me for a long moment, then he nodded slowly. I can draft that up. We can have it funded by next week. Good, I said, but there's one more thing. The house. You want to put the house in the trust. No, I said, I want to sell it. Robert's eyes went wide. Sell it? Brenda, you've been in this house for 15 years. Where will you go? I don't know yet. I lied. I had an idea, but I wasn't ready to say it out loud. But I need the equity turned into cash, and I need that cash in the trust before the party. I left his office feeling lighter. Step one was done. Now for the hard part. I didn't hire a realtor. A realtor would put a sign in the yard. A sign meant neighbors would talk. Neighbors talking meant Martha might find out. And if Martha found out, Jeremy might find out. If he knew I was selling, he'd think I was liquidating for him. He'd be counting the money before the check even cleared. No, this had to be silent. I called one of those numbers you see on the telephone poles. We buy houses for cash. Any condition. Fast closing. A man named Mike came out that afternoon. He walked through my living room, tapping on the walls, checking the AC unit. He wasn't sentimental. He didn't care about the height marks I had drawn on the doorframe for my grandkids who never visited. He just saw square footage and profit margins. It's clean, Mike said, standing in my kitchen. But the market is weird right now. And if you want a 30-day close, I want a 2-week close, I interrupted, and I want a lease-back option for 3 more weeks, so I can pack. He named a price. It was $20,000, less than what Zillow said my house was worth. The old Brenda would have haggled. The old Brenda would have worried about losing value. But I wasn't looking for value. I was looking for an exit strategy. Done, I said, extending my hand. He looked surprised, but he shook it. I'll have the paperwork over tonight. Over the next 2 weeks, my life was a whirlwind of secret activity. I packed boxes late at night with the blinds closed. I donated clothes I didn't wear. I threw away old papers. It was a purging. I was erasing Brenda Gowans, the lonely widow of Scottsdale. When the check from the house sale came through, I didn't even look at the number. I drove straight to the bank and wired it directly into the new trust account Robert had set up. I remember sitting in my car in the bank parking lot afterward. I pulled up my mobile banking app, checking account balance, $1,200. Savings account balance, $500. That was it. That was all the money I had access to in the world. Technically, I was worth over $500,000. But legally, I was poor. If Jeremy asked for a loan, I couldn't give it to him. If he asked me to co-sign a mortgage, the bank would laugh at me because I had no assets to my name. I had made myself judgment-proof. I had made myself guilt-proof. A strange sensation washed over me. You'd think seeing your bank account empty would be terrifying, but I felt powerful. I felt like I was wearing a suit of armor. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. "You're ready?" I whispered. I had neutralized their weapon. They were counting on my guilt and my assets. I had removed both. The only thing left to do was pack my suitcase for Connecticut. I went to the mall and bought a dress. It was navy blue, silk, and cost more than I usually spend on groceries for a month. I paid for it with the last bit of loose money I had kept out of the trust. I needed to look expensive. I needed to look like the golden goose they were hoping to slaughter. As I packed the dress, I thought about the invite again. Renewal of vows. It's funny, they were renewing their vows to each other based on a lie of success. I was renewing a vow to myself based on the truth of survival. I zipped up the suitcase. The house was empty now. The keys were in an envelope on the counter for Mike. My life in Arizona was gone. I was officially a woman with no fixed address, no accessible fortune, and no more patience. I picked up my purse and walked out the door. I didn't look back. Greenwich was waiting. Jeremy was waiting. He thought he was setting a trap for a mouse. He didn't realize the mouse had already eaten the cheese and dismantled the spring. He was about to welcome a shark into his home, and he had invited her in himself. I looked at myself in the full-length mirror of the hotel room, and for a moment I didn't recognize the woman staring back. Back in Scottsdale, I was invisible. I was the woman in the beige cardigan pushing a cart at the grocery store. I was the woman who wore sensible shoes and cut her own hair over the bathroom sink to save $40. I was Brenda the widow, Brenda the mother, Brenda the afterthought. But the woman in the mirror, she looked like money. I had taken a small chunk of the cash I kept out of the trust, my war chest, I called it, and I had invested it in a costume. And that's exactly what this was, a costume. I was wearing the navy blue silk dress I bought before leaving. It draped perfectly, hiding the softness around my middle and highlighting the fact that I still had good posture. I had paired it with a string of pearls, real ones, the only valuable thing my late husband, heavy on the late, had ever given me. But the real transformation was the hair. I had spent $300 at a salon in downtown Greenwich this morning. $300 that used to be my grocery budget for an entire month. I almost choked when the stylist told me the price, but I paid it. I let him color over the gray with a rich, warm chestnut. I let him blow it out until it shone under the lights. When I walked out of that salon, I held my head higher. It's amazing what happens when you look the part. People held doors open for me. The valet smiled at me. I looked like a woman who commanded respect, not a woman who begged for attention. I needed to look like this. I needed Jeremy and Jean to see me and think, jackpot. If I showed up looking frail and thrifty, they might hesitate. They might worry I didn't have enough to bail them out. But if I showed up looking like the Dowager Countess, they would salivate. They would think the rumors were true, that I was sitting on a mountain of cash, just waiting to share it. It was the perfect bait. I turned away from the mirror and walked over to the bed. My open suitcase was sitting there. Inside, tucked into the side pocket, was a thick manila envelope. I reached in and pulled it out. My hands were steady now. The shaking had stopped days ago. Inside were 2 sets of documents. The first set was the proof of the trust, the papers that proved I owned nothing, the papers that would crush Jeremy's hope when he finally asked for money. But the second set of papers, those were for me, petition for change of name. I had downloaded the forms before I left Arizona. I had filled them out in my kitchen, pressing the pen down hard. I had chosen a new name, a name that didn't belong to a forgotten mother or a grieving widow. Brenda Stone. Stone. Hard. Unbreakable. Enduring. I wasn't Brenda Gowans anymore. Brenda Gowans was a woman who waited by the phone. Brenda Gowans was a doormat. Brenda Stone was a woman who walked away. I had the papers notarized yesterday. All I had to do was file them. I planned to drop them in the mail to the courthouse the moment I left the party. It would be my final act. When I walked out of that mansion tonight, I would be leaving my old identity on their doorstep along with the dust from my shoes. I put the envelope back in my bag and snapped the suitcase shut. It was time to go. I had rented a car for the weekend, not the economy compact I usually drove. I rented a shiny silver Mercedes sedan. It cost a fortune, but again, it was part of the theater. Driving through Greenwich was surreal. The houses got bigger and bigger the further I drove from the town center. Stone walls, wrought iron gates, driveways longer than my entire street back home. My stomach did a little flip-flop as I followed the GPS. This wasn't just nerves. It was grief. I had to admit that to myself. I was driving to my son's house, a house I had never been invited to say goodbye forever. I wasn't going there to scream. I wasn't going there to make a scene. I was going there to mourn. I was attending the funeral of my relationship with my child, even though he didn't know it was dead yet. I remembered driving Jeremy to college 25 years ago. The car was packed with boxes then, too. I remembered crying all the way home, wondering how I would survive without him in the house. Now, I was wondering how I had survived with the hope of him in my heart for so long. Hope is a cruel thing when it's one-sided. It eats you alive. The GPS chirped. In 500 feet, turn right. I turned onto a private road lined with massive oak trees. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns. And then I saw it, the Vanderbilt estate, or at least that's what the invitation called it. It was a monstrosity of a house, a sprawling brick mansion with white pillars and a fountain in the driveway. It looked like something out of a movie. There were already cars lining up at the valet stand, Porsches, Rovers, Teslas. My rental Mercedes would fit right in. I slowed down, joining the line of cars. I watched the people getting out. Men in tuxedos, women in glittering gowns. They looked rich. They looked important. And they were all strangers to me. This was my son's life. He lived here. He hosted these people. He drank wine with them. And for 20 years, he hadn't wanted his mother to taint this image. I gripped the steering wheel. Don't cry, I told myself. Brenda Stone does not cry. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror one last time. The hair was perfect. The pearls were luminous. The expression on my face was calm, cool, collected. I looked like a woman who had it all. I reached over to the passenger seat and patted my purse. The envelope was there. The weapon was loaded. The valet opened my door. Good evening, ma'am. Welcome. I stepped out of the car. The cool Connecticut air hit my face. I stood up straight, smoothing my silk dress. Thank you, I said, handing him the keys. I looked up at the house. The windows were glowing with warm light. I could hear music spilling out from the open doors. It looked inviting. It looked magical, but I knew better. It was just a facade. Just like Jeremy's smile in that yacht photo. It was a beautiful shell with nothing inside but debt and desperation. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the scent of expensive perfume and old money. Showtime, Brenda, I whispered. I began to walk up the grand staircase toward the front doors. My heels clicked on the stone. Every step was a drumbeat. Click, click, click. I wasn't walking into a party. I was walking into the lion's den. But the lions didn't know that the prey they invited had brought a trap of her own. I reached the top of the stairs. The heavy wooden doors were open. And then I saw him, Jeremy. He was standing in the foyer, shaking hands with a tall man in a gray suit. He looked older than I remembered. His hair was thinning a bit at the crown. He looked tired around the eyes. But then he turned. His eyes swept over the entrance. He saw me. For a split second, I saw the shock. He didn't expect me to look like this. He expected the frumpy old lady in the cardigan. He expected the victim. Instead, he saw a woman in silk and pearls, standing tall, looking like she owned the place. I saw the shock turn into something else, something calculating. A slow smile spread across his face. It wasn't a smile of love. It was a smile of relief. He thought his ATM had just walked through the door. He started walking toward me, arms open wide. "Mom," he boomed, loud enough for everyone to hear. I smiled back, a tight, polite smile. "Hello, Jeremy," I thought. "Take a good look. It's the last time you'll ever see me." "Mom." Jeremy's voice boomed across the marble foyer. He rushed toward me, arms wide open, his tuxedo jacket flapping slightly. For a split second, my body reacted out of instinct. I wanted to brace myself. I wanted to lean into him. It had been 20 years since my son had held me. 20 years of missing his smell, his laugh, the way he used to tower over me. He wrapped his arms around me and squeezed. Hard. It should have felt like coming home, but it didn't. It felt like a sales pitch. He smelled of expensive scotch and nervous sweat. His grip was too tight, almost frantic, like a drowning man clutching a life raft. He didn't hug me because he missed me. He hugged me because he needed me to anchor him. "Look at you," he said, pulling back but keeping his hands on my shoulders. His eyes darted up and down, scanning me. They lingered on the pearl necklace. They assessed the silk of my dress. "You look incredible, Mom." "Doesn't she look incredible?" Jean appeared at his elbow as if by magic. She was wearing a silver gown that looked like it cost more than my first car. Her blonde hair was pulled back tight, her makeup flawless. But I saw the lines around her mouth. I saw the tension in her neck. "Stunning," Jean said. She leaned in and kissed the air next to my cheek, careful not to smudge her lipstick. "We are so happy you came, Brenda. It just wouldn't be a celebration without family." Family. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. "I wouldn't miss it," I said. My voice was calm, smooth. 20 years is a long time. Jean flinched just a tiny bit, a microscopic crack in the porcelain mask. But she recovered instantly. "It has been too long. Life just gets in the way, doesn't it?" "It certainly does," I agreed. "Come," Jeremy said, steering me by the elbow. "Come inside. Everyone is dying to meet you." He didn't ask if I wanted a drink. He didn't ask how my flight was. He didn't ask where I was staying. He just propelled me forward into the grand room. The room was impressive, I'll give them that. High ceilings, crystal chandeliers, floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the dark lawn. There were about 50 people milling around, holding flutes of champagne. But as I walked through the room, my mother's intuition and my years of stretching a dollar kicked in. I started to see what Martha had warned me about. The flowers on the centerpieces were beautiful, but they were starting to brown at the edges. They weren't fresh from a florist today. They were day-old discount blooms arranged to hide the wilt. I glanced at the catering staff. They were young, barely out of their teens, wearing ill-fitting vests. They weren't the high-end professional servers you hire for a Greenwich estate party. They looked like college kids hired off an app for minimum wage. I saw one of them roll his eyes when Jean snapped her fingers for a tray. And the furniture. The room felt staged. There were no personal photos, no knickknacks, no sense that human beings actually lived here. It looked like a showroom. It felt cold. "Everyone." Jeremy clapped his hands, drawing the attention of a group near the fireplace. "I want you to meet my mother, Brenda." The group turned. 3 men in suits and 2 women dripping in diamonds. "This is the woman who raised me," Jeremy announced, beaming. "She's visiting from Arizona. She's been making a killing in the real estate market out there. Sold her place at the absolute peak. I kept my smile frozen on my face, but my stomach turned. Making a killing? I sold my house to a we buy cash guy for under market value. Real estate market? I was a retired school secretary. He was building a legend. He was painting a picture of the Gowans family as a dynasty of wealth and success. He needed these people to believe that money ran in our blood. A pleasure, one of the men said, extending a hand. Jeremy tells us you're enjoying a very comfortable retirement. I have everything I need, I said vaguely, shaking his hand. Mom is very modest. Jean chimed in, slipping her arm through mine. It felt like a handcuff. She's always been so smart with her finances. That's where Jeremy gets it from. The irony almost made me laugh out loud. Jeremy got his financial sense from me. I balanced my checkbook down to the penny. Jeremy was currently throwing a party. He couldn't afford to impress people he didn't like. They paraded me around the room for the next hour. It was exhausting. Meet Mr. Henderson, Mom. He runs the hedge fund downtown. Meet the Clydes. They have a summer home in the Hamptons. Every introduction was a calculation. They were showing me off like a prize poodle. Look at her pearls. Look at her hair. She's one of us. We are safe to lend money to. But the most painful part wasn't the lies. It was the kindness. Jeremy was attentive. He brought me a glass of sparkling water with a lime twist, just the way I used to like it. How did he remember that? He hadn't called in 20 years, but he remembered I liked a twist of lime. Jean complimented my shoes. She laughed at my small joke about the humidity. She touched my arm gently when she spoke. They were being the children I had prayed for. For 2 decades, I had cried myself to sleep, wondering why they couldn't be kind to me. I thought they were incapable of it. I thought maybe they were just cold, broken people. But watching them now, I realized the truth was far worse. They knew how to be kind. They knew how to be attentive. They knew how to make me feel special. They had the ability all along. They just hadn't wanted to spend that kindness on me until I had a price tag attached to my forehead. It was transactional. This warmth, this attention, it wasn't love. It was a down payment. They were investing in me because they expected a return on investment later tonight. I felt a tear prick the corner of my eye, but I blinked it away furiously. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me cry. Are you having a good time, Mom? Jeremy asked, leaning in close. His breath was heavier with scotch now. I looked at him. I looked at the son I had nursed through chickenpox, the son I had helped with algebra homework, the son I had forgiven over and over again in my heart. It's certainly illuminating, I said. He missed the edge in my voice. He just nodded, looking distracted. He glanced over my shoulder at a couple walking toward the door. Excuse me 1 second, Mom. I need to catch the Millers before they leave. He abandoned me instantly. The mask of the doting son slipped the moment a better opportunity walked by. I stood there, alone in the middle of the crowded room, holding my water glass. I watched Jean across the room. She was arguing with a waiter. I saw her hiss something. Her face contorted in anger before she plastered the smile back on and turned to a guest. The cracks were getting wider. The desperation was seeping through the floorboards. I checked my watch. It was 9 p.m. The dinner was over. The speeches were done. The guests were starting to thin out. I knew what was coming next. I could feel it in the air. The performance was winding down, and it was time to close the deal. Sure enough, 10 minutes later, Jeremy reappeared. He looked sweatier now. He loosened his bow tie. Mom, he said, putting a hand on my back. Why don't we go into the study? It's getting loud in here. Jean and I would love to just catch up quietly, just the family. That sounds lovely, I said. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. This was it. I wasn't walking into a family chat. I was walking into the shakedown. Lead the way, I said, as I followed him down the hallway, away from the noise of the party. I touched the clasp of my purse. The trust documents were in the car, but the truth was right on the tip of my tongue. He opened the heavy oak door to the study and ushered me in. Jean was already there, pouring brandy into snifters. She looked up and smiled, but her eyes were dead. The door clicked shut behind us. The music from the party was muffled now. The silence in the room was thick, heavy, and expensive. I sat down in a leather wingback chair. I crossed my legs. I folded my hands in my lap. I looked at my son and his wife. "So," Jeremy said, sitting on the edge of the desk, trying to look casual but failing. "How is life in Arizona really treating you, Mom?" The trap was set. They were about to step right into it. The heavy oak door clicked shut, sealing us inside the study. The noise of the party, the clinking glasses, the laughter, the string quartet disappeared instantly. It was just the three of us. Jeremy hopped off the desk and walked over to the leather chair opposite mine. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, giving me that boyish, earnest look he used to use when he wanted to borrow the car in high school. Jean stood by the fireplace, swirling her brandy. She wasn't smiling anymore. Her eyes were sharp, watching me like a hawk watches a field mouse. "So," Jeremy started, his voice lowering to a conspiratorial whisper, "we really are so glad you came, Mom. It's been too long." "It has," I said simply. 20 years. Right. He waved his hand dismissively, as if 2 decades of neglect was just a minor scheduling conflict. "Life gets crazy, you know? But seeing you tonight, it made me realize how important family is, especially now." He paused, waiting for me to agree. I stayed silent. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded over my purse. "The thing is, Mom," he continued, shifting slightly in his chair, "we're in a bit of an exciting transition period right now. The firm is expanding. We have this massive opportunity to buy out a competitor in Manhattan. It's a once-in-a-lifetime deal." I watched him lie. I knew from Martha that there was no expansion. There was only debt. But he was good at this. He sounded passionate. He sounded successful. "That sounds nice, Jeremy," I said. Jean took a step forward. "It's more than nice, Brenda. It's a legacy. It's for the family. But like all big business deals, it requires liquidity." There it was. The magic word. Liquidity. Jeremy nodded vigorously. "Exactly. Our assets are tied up in the house and the current portfolio. We're just a little short on the cash needed to close the deal next week. It's a temporary bridge, really, just for a few months." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document. He smoothed it out on the coffee table between us. It was a loan agreement. "We were thinking," Jeremy said, his voice speeding up now. "You're sitting on that house in Scottsdale. It's fully paid off, right? Dad's life insurance. The savings, it's just sitting there in a low-interest account, doing nothing." He picked up a heavy gold pen and clicked it. "If you could just sign as a guarantor," he said, sliding the paper toward me. "Or, better yet, if we could arrange a quick equity loan against your property, we could pay you back with interest, 10%. That's better than the bank gives you." Jean moved closer. "It would really help us, Brenda. And it would mean you're part of this success, part of the family's future." I looked at the paper. Guarantor, Brenda Gowans. Collateral, real property located at. They had already typed in my address. They had done their homework. They knew exactly what my house was worth. They had probably looked it up on Zillow 5 minutes before I walked in the door. I looked up at Jeremy. He was sweating again. His smile was tight, straining at the edges. "You need me to sign this tonight?" I asked. "Well, the deal closes Monday," Jeremy said, forcing a laugh. So, sooner is better. We can get a notary in here, right now. Jean is a notary, actually. Of course she was. I reached out and took the pen from his hand. The room went dead silent. I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the corner. Tick, tock, tick, tock. Jeremy's eyes were glued to my hand. Jean actually stopped breathing. They were so close. They thought they had won. They thought the lonely old widow was so desperate to be part of the family that she would sign away her security for a promise of 10% interest that would never come. I held the pen over the paper. I let the tip hover just above the signature line. I let them savor the victory for 3 seconds. 1, 2, 3. Then I capped the pen with a loud click. I placed it gently back on the table. "I'm afraid I can't help you," I said. The air left the room. Jeremy blinked. "What?" "I can't sign this," I said, my voice steady and calm. "It wouldn't be valid." Jeremy laughed, a nervous, stuttering sound. "Mom, don't be silly. Of course it's valid. It's your house. You own it free and clear. I checked the county records." "You checked the records last week, Jeremy," I said. Jean stepped forward, her voice sharp. "What are you talking about?" I looked her dead in the eye. "I sold the house." Jeremy froze. You what?" "I sold it," I repeated. "I closed on it days ago. The deed has already been transferred. I don't own 124 Cactus Drive anymore. I don't have any collateral to offer you." Jeremy's face went pale. The confident businessman vanished, replaced by a panicked child. Okay, you sold it. That's fine. That's actually better. You have the cash. Then, the liquid cash. We can just do a direct loan. We can rewrite this paper in 2 minutes." He reached for the paper, his hands shaking. "How much did you get?" 400,000. 5. "Jeremy, stop," I said. He looked up wild-eyed. "I don't have the money," I said. "You just said you sold it." Jean snapped, her polite mask shattering completely. "Where is the money, Brenda?" "It's in a trust," I said. "Great. A trust." Jeremy said, grasping at straws. "You're the trustee. You can authorize a distribution. You can. It is an irrevocable trust." "Jeremy," I cut him off. "Do you know what that means?" He stared at me, his mouth slightly open. "It means I don't control the assets anymore," I explained, speaking slowly like I was teaching a toddler. "I moved the proceeds from the house sale, your father's life insurance, and my entire savings into the trust last week." "Who is the beneficiary?" Jean demanded. Her voice was a shriek now. "Who gets the money?" I smiled. A genuine smile. "The Whispering Pines Cat Sanctuary," I said. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bones. Jeremy stared at me. "The Cat Sanctuary?" "They do wonderful work," I said pleasantly. "Old cats that nobody wants. Just like old mothers." "You gave my inheritance to a cat shelter." Jeremy whispered. The color had drained from his face entirely. He looked like he was going to be sick. "It wasn't your inheritance, Jeremy," I said firmly. "It was my life. And since you haven't been part of my life for 20 years, you aren't part of my estate." "You can't do this," Jean hissed. She walked around the desk, looming over me. "You have to undo it. Call the lawyer. Revoke it." "I can't," I said. "That's what irrevocable means, Jean. It's done. The money is locked. I get a small monthly stipend for my living expenses. But the principal, it's gone. It belongs to the kiddies now." I watched the realization hit them. It was physical. Jeremy slumped back in his chair. He looked at the loan agreement on the table, the paper that was now worthless trash. He ran a hand through his hair, messing up his perfect style. "We needed that money," he whispered. "Mom, we're underwater. We're going to lose the house." We're going to lose everything. I know, I said. He looked up at me, shocked. You know, I know you aren't expanding. I said, I know this party is a sham. I know you only invited me because you ran out of other people to use. I stood up. My knees popped a little, but I felt 10 feet tall. You thought you were inviting a checkbook, I said, looking down at them. But you just invited your mother. And your mother is broke. At least, as far as you're concerned. Jean looked around the room, as if looking for a way out. Her eyes were wide with panic. The party outside was still going on. The investors were still drinking their champagne, waiting to be impressed. But the show was over. The actors had forgotten their lines. You wasted your time. Jean spat at me. You wasted our time coming here. No, I said, picking up my purse. I didn't waste my time. I came to say goodbye. I looked at the loan agreement one last time. You wanted a bridge loan, I said softly. But you burned the bridge 20 years ago, Jeremy. You can't walk across ashes. I turned my back on them. I didn't wait for a response. I didn't wait for the screaming to start. The trap had snapped shut, and they were the ones caught in it. I watched the color drain from their faces. It was a slow process, like watching a tide go out. Jeremy sat slumped in the leather chair, staring at his hands that had never done a day of hard labor in their life. Jean was gripping the edge of the desk, so hard her knuckles were white. The silence in the study was absolute. Outside the heavy oak door, the murmur of the party continued. People were laughing, drinking champagne, and eating canapés, completely unaware that their hosts had just been financially gutted. Jeremy looked up at me. His eyes were wet. For a second, I thought I saw regret. But then he spoke. How could you? He whispered. We're family. That word again. Family. It was the weapon they always used when they wanted something. I adjusted my purse on my shoulder. I stood up straighter, feeling the silk of my dress brush against my legs. Family? I asked. Family isn't a word you say when the bill comes due, Jeremy. Family is showing up. Family is calling back. Family is treating a person with basic human dignity, not selling their hand-stitched quilt for $10 at a yard sale. Jean opened her mouth to speak, probably to scream, but I held up a hand. No, I said firmly. I'm talking now. For 20 years, I listened to your silence. Now you're going to listen to me. I took a step toward the desk. You didn't invite a mother to this party, I said, my voice low and clear. You invited an ATM. You looked at me and saw a checkbook. You saw a bailout. Well, I have news for you kids. The machine is out of order. Permanently. I reached into my bag and pulled out the white envelope, the one with the name change documents inside. I placed it gently on the polished mahogany desk, right next to the useless loan agreement. What is that? Jean asked, her voice trembling. That is my resignation, I said. Inside that envelope is a copy of a petition I filed this morning. It's a notification. I am changing my name. Brenda Gowans doesn't exist anymore. She was a woman who waited by the phone for 20 years. I left her in Arizona. Jeremy stared at the envelope like it was a bomb. I'm leaving now, I said. Do not follow me. Do not call me. If you try to find me, my lawyer has instructions to file a harassment suit. And since I have plenty of money for legal fees now that I'm not bailing you out, I suggest you don't test me. I turned around and walked toward the door. My heart was pounding, not with fear, but with adrenaline. It was the rush of freedom. Mom, wait. Jeremy croaked. He sounded like a child. What are we supposed to do? I paused with my hand on the brass doorknob. I looked back at him one last time. I don't know, Jeremy, I said. Maybe you should try getting a job. I opened the door and stepped out. The noise of the party hit me instantly. The music, the chatter, the clinking of glass. I walked down the hallway, my head held high. I passed the kitchen, where the catering staff was frantically plating desserts. I passed the living room, where the investors were still mingling. A woman in a red dress stopped me. "Oh, leaving so soon? We haven't even cut the cake." I smiled at her, a genuine, dazzling smile. "I have to run. I have a flight to catch. But enjoy the cake. I hear it was very expensive." I walked out the front door and down the grand stone steps. The valet saw me coming and jogged to get the silver Mercedes. The night air was cool and crisp. I took a deep breath. It smelled like autumn leaves and expensive cologne, but mostly it smelled like liberation. I tipped the valet $20 because I wasn't stingy, I just wasn't a fool, and got into the car. As I drove down the long, winding driveway, I looked in the rearview mirror. The Vanderbilt estate was glowing in the distance, a beacon of wealth and prestige. But I knew the truth. The lights would be getting turned off soon. I drove toward the highway, and I didn't cry. I turned on the radio and hummed along to a song I didn't know. I felt lighter than air. The weight of 20 years of hope, 20 years of disappointment, 20 years of waiting, it was all gone. I had left it on that mahogany desk. 4 months later, the tea kettle began to whistle. I got up from my rocking chair and walked into the small kitchen. The cottage was drafty, but I liked it. It smelled of salt water and old wood. Through the kitchen window, I could see the Atlantic Ocean, gray and choppy under the winter sky. Maine was cold, but the people were warm. I poured the hot water into my mug. Earl Grey. I took a sip and wrapped my cardigan tighter around myself. My phone buzzed on the counter. It was a text from the local library. "Shift starts in an hour, Brenda Stone. Don't forget it's story time for the kids today." I smiled. Brenda Stone. I liked the sound of it. It fit me. I walked back to the living room and sat down. On the small side table, there was a letter. It had arrived yesterday. My lawyer had forwarded it to me as per our agreement. He screened everything. He told me I didn't have to read it if I didn't want to. The handwriting on the front was messy. Jeremy's writing. I picked it up. It felt light. I knew what was inside. Apologies. Excuses. Maybe a plea for a smaller loan. Maybe the news that they had lost the house and were getting divorced. Maybe the news that Jean had left him now that the money was gone. I turned the envelope over in my hands. A few months ago, I would have torn this open. I would have searched for a hidden meaning. I would have looked for a crumb of love. But I looked out at the ocean. The waves were crashing against the rocks, relentless and strong. They didn't beg the shore to accept them. They just were. I didn't need to know what was in the letter. It didn't matter. The story of Brenda Gowans and her ungrateful son was a book I had already finished reading. I had closed the cover. I wasn't going to reopen it just to read the footnotes. I stood up and walked over to the wood-burning stove in the corner of the room. I opened the small iron door. The fire was crackling warmly. I tossed the unopened letter into the flames. I watched the paper curl and blacken. I watched the ink disappear. It took less than 10 seconds for it to turn into ash. "Goodbye, Jeremy," I whispered. I went back to my chair and picked up my tea. I had a shift at the library in an hour. Then I was meeting my new friend, Sarah, for lunch. Then I was going to volunteer at the animal shelter to check on the cats that my trust was supporting. My life was full. My life was mine. I took a long sip of tea, letting the warmth spread through my chest. I didn't lose a son back in Greenwich. You can't lose something you never really had. I lost a parasite. I lost a heavy weight that had been dragging me down for 2 decades. And in the process of losing him, I had done something much more important. I had finally found myself. Did you like the story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks, so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story.